I don't want to start in case the AV guy says I can't start yet. But he didn't say don't start, so I'm assuming it's fine. So I'm going to start. So we're a little bit behind schedule. We spent a lot of time fixing various Conda-related issues. So I'm going to make the final bit of this quite quick. I'm just going to very quickly go over tracking changes as you make them to the repository and sort of the differences between staging a change with git add and committing a change with git commit. And I'm just going to very quickly show how to create a remote repository and how to set that remote repository on GitHub as a remote hosting repository connected to your local repository. So one of the questions I was asked over the break is, if you look in the Markdown instructions, you'll see a case of where we run git add multiple times before running git commit. And the question was, is that a no operation? So does the second add not do anything? And indeed, if you make a change to a file and then you run git add, you stage that file for change, and then you just git add that file again and again, it won't make any difference because the file's already staged for commit. If, however, you make some changes to a file and stage those changes by running git add, and then you change that file again, those changes won't be reflected in the staged file. When you stage a file, it takes a snapshot of the state of the file or files at the time of staging, and then any changes you make after that won't be reflected. And so if you then ran git commit, the version of the file that gets committed to the repository is the one you staged, not the one you've subsequently modified. So to illustrate this, what I'm going to do is make some modifications to our Readme file. And all the commands, again, are in the Markdown. So if at any point you miss something, either shout at me or just check the Markdown instructions, and they're all in there. So where we left off, I created a new file, hello.py, everyone's favorite file. And we ran git status. So just to remind you, our Readme file is currently under version control. Hello.py is not. Git status tells us there's an untracked file. Suppose now I make some changes to the Readme file. So I'm going to just add some text to the Readme file. Again, if you're on Windows, continue doing all of this in Git Bash. We don't need Anaconda for any of this. So I've made some changes to the Readme file. And just to show you, a Readme file is now very polite. And now if I run git status, we can see that the Readme file is listed as modified. And Git distinguishes between files that are currently tracked but that have changed and files that are currently not tracked. So you can see that it recognizes that the Readme file that it's currently tracking has been modified, and it recognizes that the hello.py file has not been tracked at all. So what we need to do now is git add our changes to the Readme file. If we run git status again, we can see that it's ready to commit those changes to the Readme file. Now, suppose we make another change to the Readme file. This isn't in the Markdown, but it's exactly the same. So I've changed the contents of the Readme file. If I run git status, you can see that the Readme file has once again been modified since our last commit. So if I run git commit right now, the change that I've just committed was the original text that I added to the Readme file, not the text that I then modified it with after I staged it. If I want to commit my most recent changes, I need to stage the Readme file once again. So I just run git add readme.md. I run git status. We can now see that the most recent changes to the Readme file are tracked. And so you can see this is showing in green. Everything is nice and happy. Hello.py has not been tracked at any point, so it's still not being tracked. And you can make multiple changes before you go and commit those changes. So in my last staging, I tracked my most recent changes to Readme. But what if I also want to track my hello.py file? I can stage hello.py, check what's happened, and now both the most recent version of readme.md and my new file hello.py are staged for commit. So if I now commit, if I remember my commands and add my commit, so you can see I've now committed all of those changes, and the helpful messages from Git are telling me there were 2 files changed. So in particular, it informs you that if you create a new file, it will tell you that you've added a new file. So create mode hello.py. OK, so and that really is the basics of adding files and changing files and tracking those files locally using version control. There's all sorts of things you can think about. For example, if you want to revert a different change, the process for doing that is different depending on whether or not you've only staged the change or whether you've actually committed the change. It's much easier to revert a change if you haven't yet committed it. But as in all of these things, Google is your friend. And depending on the complexity of the project, it may take a little Googling, it may take a lot of Googling, but Git is an incredibly powerful tool, and no matter what version control problem you're having, chances are there's a way you can resolve it gracefully. But we're not going to get into that here because we are a little short on time, but please feel free to ask questions through the remainder of the tutorial. So I suppose the only final thing to touch on before we go on to hosting our code on GitHub is there's a difference between deleting a file from your computer's file system and deleting it from the version control history. So for example, if I want to get rid of hello.py, what I might naively do is just type rm hello.py. And if I do that, it will delete the file from my file system, but the version history will still recognize that that file exists because I won't have staged that removal and committed it. So at any point, I can recover that by reverting the commit. If I want to actually remove the file from version control entirely, it's a very similar command. I use the git rm command, and I could type git rm hello.py. OK? And finally, if I've deleted the file from my system's file tree, but I didn't delete it from the version control history, I can just use the git rm command again with the cached flag. And what that will tell it to do is, rather than physically deleting files from the file system and removing them from the version control, all it will do is it will go into the versioning history and remove that file from the versioning history. So you can use this to clear up version control on files you removed naively, or you can use it to remove stuff from version control without actually deleting the copy you have locally. So it's quite a powerful and expressive version control system. OK, so let's get that out of the way. So before I go into GitHub, are there just any questions about Git from command line? No? Everyone's happy? Everyone is very happy? Cool. Right. So we've got our local repository. And what if we want to back up that repository on GitHub? Or if the repository contained anything worth sharing, I wanted to share it with someone. So the first thing that I need to do is go onto GitHub, and if you haven't already created a GitHub account, please create a GitHub account. And then on your GitHub homepage, what we want to do is just go and create a new repository. You can do this by clicking the New button, funnily enough. And so if anyone's used GitHub in any way before, you will be intimately familiar with this screen. And it's the same process every single time. So the first thing we want to do is create a repository on GitHub whose name matches the repository that we have on our local system. And it's a good thing I chose a memorable and entirely original name. Do we want to add a description to our repository? No, we don't. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And at this stage, we can immediately set whether we want the repository to be public or private. So a public repository on GitHub, anybody can see the repository. Only you can make changes to the repository. You can choose to add another user and enable them to make commits. But anyone can see the repository, anyone can fork the repository, anyone can offer their changes to the repository to you through what's known as a pull request, which we can talk about more later if you like, but only you can actually make changes to a repository, even if it's public. So don't worry about someone screwing with your code. They won't. They'll just steal it. But nobody wants my code. So alternatively, if you don't want to share the code, so say you're working on something sensitive or proprietary, or you don't want someone to scoop you, or you're just embarrassed about your code, that's me. You can set the repository up as private right from the start so that nobody ever gets a chance to view the repository until you're ready to share it. But we're going to make this public because I have no shame. And so the final step, which is actually important to be aware of when you're creating a GitHub repository for something that you already have locally, is GitHub will give you the option to initialize the repository and create a Readme file for you, add a license file for you, and add a .gitignore file, which lets you tell Git to not track files with certain extensions. It's important to make sure you don't add any of these if you plan on committing the repository from your local system, because if the file already exists and you try to push a different version up, it can result in errors. So it's safest just not to create these if you're working with an existing repository locally. Okay, so this is my next favorite screen. And the process, so we have our repository locally. We have a repository with the same name on GitHub. All we need to do now, and this is an illustration of the distributed nature of Git as a file control system, is what we're going to do is we're going to set the repository hosted on GitHub as a remote server to which we're going to connect our local repository. And the instructions for how to do this on GitHub are very, very good. But I'm just going to very quickly run you through how to do it live and hope I don't screw up. So if we go back to my terminal, we're in our repository. Our repository exists. Our repository is ready to go. All we need to do is add what's known as a remote or a remote server to our repository. So to do this, we use the Git Remote command. This manages all aspects of remote servers. And so we're going to use the command git remote add origin. And then we're going to paste in the link to our repository from GitHub. In this case, it's just github/my username/ the name of the repo.git. It's always the same. There we go. And so what this is telling Git to do is say, for this local repository, set the remote origin on this other server to this URL. OK. And finally, all we need to do now is upload our code from our local copy to our remote copy. And this process is known as pushing. So you can imagine you have a copy of code here. You want to get it here. You push the code from where I am to where I want it to be. And the command we use for that is git push. And we can be explicit here. We don't have time to get into dealing with different branches of a project. Those of you who have used Git before, maybe GitHub before, will already be, to varying degrees, familiar with the concept of having different branches of the same project. You can always explicitly specify which branch of a project you want to push and where you want to push it to. So when I say git push, I'm telling Git, take the local copy and push it somewhere. Where am I going to push it to? I'm going to push it to our remote origin. And I'm going to be explicit and say, I'm going to use the master branch. Now, the convention when you create a new repository in Git is that your project will have one branch, and by convention, that branch will be called master. And that will always be the default branch in any repository ever. So the version we created on GitHub, the default branch is called master. Our local version, the default branch is called master. And if we don't make any changes, we can be very implicit and just say git push. But I'm going to be explicit and say git push origin master. OK? And GitHub is nice and secure, so you can't just take code on a random machine and push it to, if someone knows the URL for your private repo, they can't maliciously push stuff to there without your GitHub logging credentials. So it should ask you for your username, should ask you for your password. You're not getting mine. OK, and so the push was successful, and what Git has done is it's taken the master branch of our local repository, taken all of the code and all of the changes to the code and all the versioning history of that, and pushed it onto the remote server. So now if I go back to GitHub, and all of these instructions will be presented to you when you create a repository on GitHub, so don't worry about missing anything. I'm now on the repository on GitHub, which 5 minutes ago didn't exist, and you can see the Readme file, which we most recently changed to say goodbye, is up on GitHub. You can see, as I mentioned earlier, GitHub will automatically render readme.md as the front page of the directory in the repository. And we can go into hello.py, which is a little simplistic, even by Python Hello World standards. It contains nothing. But that's the file we created locally. But we can go the other way as well. And GitHub's quite nice, because you're able to edit any text file on GitHub and commit those changes to the branch you're working on GitHub. So let's flesh out our Python Hello World file. So actually, I'll just quickly go back there just in case anyone missed what I did. So well, there we go. So if we click on the file we want to edit from the repository, go over to the right-hand side, there's a little pencil button, and click that to edit the file. And that'll just display the raw text content of the file. I'm editing a Python file. You can edit whatever you want. So we're going to modify our file. And we can, from here, directly commit those changes. And GitHub will automatically generate a minimalist commit message for you. In this case, update hello.py. You can modify this manually if you like. So if you go into my first repo, that file's now been changed. And you can see GitHub is telling us it was the last commit was 12 seconds ago on that file, and 12 minutes ago for readme.md. So we've made those changes remotely, and we can now perform the inverse operation to Git Push, which pushed our code from here to there by performing the operation pull, which is exactly what it sounds like. We have some code somewhere over there in the ether, and we want to pull it to our local machine. And the syntax for this is exactly the same. We use the command git pull. Oh, I haven't set the stuff, so I need to do this explicitly. I'm being naughty. So git pull, and tell Git, I want you to pull from my remote origin, which is on GitHub, and I want you to pull from the master branch to the master branch. Okay? What have I done? Now we get to resolve conflicts in live. Excellent. What did I do? Of course I deleted Hello World. OK, hello.py exists. There we go. OK, don't be like me, be better than me. OK, so that was a very simple thing to fix, because all I had to do was recreate the file that didn't exist. If it gets more complex, you start delving into, there are, depending on the exact conflict you're trying to resolve and the exact issue you're trying to fix, there are nicer ways and there are not so nice ways of fixing it. And you can find many colorful Stack Overflow discussions about the best way to resolve certain issues. But the internet is a helpful place, and if you just Google the problem you're having, I guarantee you will find a resolution. Lots of people use Git. OK, so we've pulled our changes to hello.py. And what you can see is the only file that we changed when we pulled was hello.py, because we didn't change the readme file. And just to show you that it did in fact work, our hello.py file, which I literally just created locally, therefore was empty, now contains our print function. So we've pushed code to GitHub. We've pulled code locally. So just one final thing that I want to very, very, very briefly illustrate before I hand over to Peter, and that is if I create a Jupyter notebook or an IPython notebook locally, I put some code in there. I can execute that notebook locally, push it to GitHub, and immediately show somebody else that notebook on GitHub. It's not as powerful and expressive as something like Binder because they can't execute the notebook. Some visualizations might not work as well, but you're perfectly capable of hosting a notebook on GitHub and enabling somebody to view the contents of that notebook. So I'm going to create hello.ipynb. I'm going to fire up. God, Fergus, what have you done to my computer? My poor laptop. Okay. There you go. So I'm just going to fire up Jupyter. I'm going to open. Yes. Oh my God, what's going on here? Oh no, no. Why are there unsaved changes? Shouldn't be unsaved changes. All right, get out of here. Okay, we're going to not do that. Okay, hello.ipynb doesn't exist. Very good. Very good. Refresh. Why does hello.ipynb? Okay, let's try that again. So launch Jupyter Lab. There we go. Okay, hello.ipynb doesn't exist. So I'm going to create a new notebook. I'm going to call this hello.ipynb because I'm creative. Okay, so I'm going to create a notebook. I'm going to execute it. I'm going to make sure that's saved. It should be saved. I'm going to come out of that. Kill the Jupyter session. Clear all of that. Our notebook now exists. I'm going to git add hello.ipynb. I'm going to commit hello.ipynb to the repository. The very helpful message. And finally, I'm going to push the notebook we've just created to GitHub. I once accidentally typed my password instead of my username when doing this. Very embarrassing moment. Don't do that. So if we refresh the repository on GitHub, you can see hello.ipynb is now up there. And if I load this, it might display. There we go. So it's a very, very minimalistic example, but you can see that GitHub doesn't just render like the raw text content of the notebook file. It renders the cells, and also if you have output from those cells from previously executing the notebook, it will also display the most recent output from that notebook. So for example, if you generated a plot, you could upload the notebook to GitHub with the plot already generated in the notebook, and somebody viewing that notebook on GitHub, okay, they won't be able to execute the notebook, that's what Binder is for, but they'll be able to view the notebook and see all of your plots. And so they can see immediately exactly what you've done without having to take the notebook anywhere else. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to talk to you briefly about hosting notebooks on Binder. Do you want to use your laptop? Okie doke. Right.
So was everybody able to get to their clones on their own Git repository? If you don't have that in your own Git repository, you may want to put up your red flag so one of the Ferguses can help you with that. Because we're going to do a hands-on session, so it's very important that you can get to their own GitHub account and you can see your copy there. Okay, so we're talking now about Binder. Basically here the idea is, as you see in your struggle setting up your environment, if you want anybody else to reproduce your research, you can't go through all those steps. It's just way too much work and too much trouble, right? So we want to basically set it up for the rest of the world to use it. They don't need to do anything. The only thing they need to know how to click. That's all they need to know. So that's what Binder is for. Let's go first to the Binder slides here. I think I have them set up. Okay, so basically the idea, we want to make your code reproducible by anyone and anywhere. Okay, so we're basically talking about this part now. So we talked about Jupyter, we talked about Conda, and just talked about GitHub. So this is the last piece of that we need to have in place to make that possible. So again, Binder, is an environment to share your scientific software. And here's the idea. So Jane, she just did some experiments. She's writing up her paper, but she wants to, share now her Jupyter notebooks with anyone without going through the installation process. So what she does, she creates a Jupyter notebook, and in my first session I talked about the 10 simple rules. So you want to add some text, equations, you create some figures, you want to explain what they mean, so you create your notebook. And then the next step is, that's what we've done just right now, you commit your changes to GitHub. So then you have your code in public on GitHub. So we just got to that step. And now the last step is, want to make it available for everyone. This is where Binder comes in. And Binder needs to know the environment. That's really the idea, reproducible environment. So I'll tell you how to create that environment now. And then we can share it to everyone on Binder. So this is the last step we're doing now. Okay, so how do you set up a Git repository for Binder? When you did your installation, you used this file environment.yml. You probably remember that you did this conda create environment using a file called environment.yml. In case you looked at it, it looks like this here. So you have seen this before. This is a conda environment. So okay, the name of this environment is ISMB 2019, so that's what you're using. The channels, this is basically where are those different packages hosted. And you may not know that, but these where you just Google for it. You want to use PyMold 3D, just Google for it, and we'll see it will be on this repository called RMG, for example. So by just Googling, that's the way you figure out what channels that you need. And then we want to have an environment that's reproducible. We fix specific version. We say, okay, we want to use Python 3.7. We want to use Matplotlib 3.1.0, etc. If you don't do that, I can guarantee you in a year from now, that notebook won't work anymore. At least it will be full of error messages. So the only way to make it reproducible, you need to freeze the version like that. That's the only way to make it work. Okay. So if you looked at this Binder directory, so Binder/Binder, that's a specific name that Binder will recognize. So don't call it anything else. It needs to be called Binder. And within that, we define the environment. First of all, we create our environment.yml file, and you see I've added it right here. Okay, so that's step number one. That creates your environment. Secondly, there's another file, post build, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. So what is this post build file for? Some software, they need extensions. The thing about Jupyter Lab is it's an extensible environment, but that also means you need to install those extensions. And one extension that's frequently used called Pi Widgets, it basically allows you to create menus, sliders, checkboxes, etc. in your Jupyter notebooks. And that, unfortunately, needs to be installed. So in this file called post build, it looks like this. The first line always looks that says it's a bash script. And then you put in whatever extensions need to be installed here. Usually if you use a piece of software, it will tell you what type of extensions you need to install. And this is the way it works. Jupyter Lab extension install. And this means, okay, install Ipa Widget version 1.0. Again, we have a version number here. We want to fix it to that version. So that's what this post build file is for. Any questions about that? Okay. Okay, so then we want to be able to run this on Binder. So let's first go to mybinder.org. So basically the way you launch it is basically you take your GitHub URL and you paste it right in here, and then you could say launch. That would launch your Jupyter Notebook in Binder, but let's don't do that yet. Let's go back to my presentation first, if I can find it. Let's see. So here's an example how I set it up. So the Git repository, for example, don't do that. But this will be setting up Binder for the current tutorial. I paste in the URL for our workshop here. I could click Binder, and that would launch, and you can run any of the notebooks that we currently have without software installation. It's all done for you. So all that trouble you went through the last hour or two, you don't need to do it. This would have just done it for you automatically. But then, you want to share this notebook or your notebooks with somebody else. And the way to do that is, on this Binder website, it will tell you the link. This is a URL. You can just copy that link and send it to your collaborator or add it to a web page. People just need to click on that link, and it will launch Binder with those notebooks you have in that GitHub repository. Or what's really nice is there's a specific launch button here. By copying this particular piece right here, this one line, you can add a badge. It's called a Binder badge to your Git repository or to your web page and so on. And people can just click that launch button. Okay. So far we talked about, okay, we can launch a Git repository, you can run all the notebooks, but let's say you want to share just one specific notebook with somebody else. You can do it like that. You put in the Git repository URL up here, but then you also specify specific notebooks. So for example, I only want to share, for example, Jupyter test.ip, this IPython notebook, but I need to tell it where it is. It's in the 3 Jupyter folder, and that's the name of it. So that will now launch a specific Jupyter notebook rather than just a Git repository, so depending what you want to do. Okay, but this launches all Jupyter Notebook, but we really prefer Jupyter Lab. So what you can do to make it launch Jupyter Lab is one small change. So you take this link that you get from Binder, and you add a little piece to it. You say $URL path equals lab. So here's an example. So this was the original link here. Go up to master. And down here you see we added $URL path equal lab. So if you add that little piece to it, then it will launch Jupyter Lab instead of Jupyter Notebook. And similarly, if you want to use launch Jupyter Lab with a specific notebook, you add this extension URL path equal lab, and then you say /tree equals, and this is the path and the name to your specific Jupyter Notebook. So that's how you launch a specific Jupyter Notebook in Jupyter Lab. Any questions so far? Okay, so now we're actually going to the hands-on part. So let's go to the 5-binder directory in your Git repository. So in here, so let's everybody go to this particular piece, 5-binder, into the Readme file here. And you see there's a hands-on exercise. So what we're going to do here, first, you would go to mybinder.org, and then in this case, we want to paste your binder, the URL of your local copy of our tutorial. Part of the instruction of the tutorial was you did the git clone, right? And that means you now have a local copy, you have your own copy now of that entire tutorial in your own Git repository. And we want to use that one. So go to your GitHub account, github.com, and your username, and there should be a reproducible computational workflows repository there. If you don't have it, please put up your red flag, and we'll see if we can help you. Yeah.
I think so. Everyone will log into the repository, but I don't think we'll either push that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, so in that case, let's do it slightly differently. Instead of your username, let's just use the one from, this one here. So copy this. So instead, you want to copy this link right up there, from the tutorial, from the workshop. So once you put in that link into my binder, you also want to add a path, let's say, for example, to this 3D visualization as a file. So maybe let me just walk you through the process. Now let's kind of do that together. So first I'm going to get the URL for the repository. So I'm copying the GitHub URL here. Now we're going to mybinder.org. So I paste in the URL right here. And for now, I'm not going to specify any particular notebook. I'll just use all of them. And then down here, we want to copy this binder badge. So you click on this little arrow here. And we want to get the first one. It has an M with the arrow down. That's called Markdown. That's a specific format of that Readme file. So you want to copy this binder badge like this. I'm clicking on here. So now we copied that text. Okay, so next thing, you have your own copy of the repository. You cloned it, right? So let's make this bigger. So in here, you now want to go into this folder called 5binder. And let's see. If you haven't activated your environment, then you need to do that. I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to activate this now. And then I start Jupyter Lab. And we're going to open up this binder.md file here. And then it says here we want to paste that text. So that text I just copied. So I go in here and remove this line here and copy the binder badge text right here like this. Is everybody at that step? Okay. So on here, if you right-click on it, you can say Show Markdown Preview. We want to see how this file actually will look like. So if we do the preview, looks like this. Here's our binder launch button. So this is the way you create a launch button. Now, let's click on it. This may be a little slow since now 50 people try to do it at the same time. So no guarantee it will actually work now, but let's just see what happens. So if you see it spinning, if you want to know what's going on, you click on this build logs, and it will tell you what it's doing. It says it's launching the server now. So this will be an interesting test for Binder to see how it handles 50 people at the same time. Isn't quite made for it, but we'll see. Oh, it worked, okay. I'm sorry? Yeah, so let's go back. How did I run this? Do you have that badge? Just click on it. And what happens? You want to have a look at that? So who has been able to launch on Binder so far? Anybody? Okay. Are you guys waiting? Is it spinning for you guys? Okay, I guess let's just wait. That's the unfortunate part of Binder. You need to have some patience. So if you look at this, probably hard, probably you can't read that, but if you see the URL up there, before when you run your Jupyter Notebook, it said localhost there. That means you run it on your own computer. But now up here it says it runs on hub.gke.mybinder.org. This actually runs on the Google Cloud, that runs who knows where, And you can now run any of the notebooks in here. So let me show you a notebook that we'll use in our session later on. It's a 3D visualization notebook here. We just run it. So this will now run there. The environment has all been installed, so I can just go through the steps right here. Okay, so now you see we have a 3D visualization in here. And again, it's all set up. A user didn't have to install anything. You can just go. This actually visualizes the entire protein data bank, which has 154,000 structures. You can go, using the slider, we can go through any of the structures and look at them. So this is an example of those Pi Widgets where we installed the Jupyter extension. So you can create little menus like little sliders and checkboxes and things like that as well. So this is an example, if you want to do that. The idea is we really want to make it easy for users to use. We don't want them to modify the code. They may not even know how to program, but I think anybody will be able to see, if you see the sliders there, how to use those. So this is a good way of adding interactivity, to your notebook. Okay, so who has been able to launch on Binder now and maybe run a notebook? Okay, maybe 1/3 so far. It's still spinning for the rest of you guys? Yeah, I think we are stressing the system a little bit with this workshop. So in the interest of time, but everybody has been able to create the Binder launch button and be able to launch it, right? Okay, so maybe while it's coming up, let me talk about a few other options, So Binder is good more for a demo. If it's a very small data set and it runs pretty quickly, then Binder is good. Binder is more for demo purpose. But let's say you have some real computation to do. It may take hours to run your notebook or something. Then Binder is not the right environment for that. So there are alternatives. So let me talk about that now. Okay, so another option to share Jupyter Notebooks called Ciphers. It's a pretty new environment. First of all, it's free. It's like Binder. It's free. Anybody can use it. But you need to create an account for it. But there's a good reasons to do that. First of all, you get more CPUs by default. You can get up to 8 cores. If you have something that uses multiple CPUs, you can use that. Have more memory. You can, by default, get up to 8 gigabytes of memory. And you have persistent storage, so you can store your data in your notebooks in there. Actually, they give you 100 gigabytes free storage, so that's pretty nice. So, plus, you can run your notebooks for up to 48 hours. With Binder, after some inactivity, it will just die. You need to start it again, which is annoying. So with Ciphers, you can keep your notebooks open up to 48 hours, and then they will time out. You could actually run the calculations for 48 hours if it's a long-running calculation. If you need more, you can extend it even further. And if you are using R, you can also run RStudio on it in the same way. This is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, but don't tell Trump on it, but it's free for anybody. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to give you a little demo how we use Ciphers. And by the way, there's a presentation by Jason Williams from the Ciphers team on Wednesday, a special session Wednesday at 2 p.m. You may want to go to his session to learn more about Ciphers. Okay, so this is more, if you really want to have a production environment or compute-intensive environment, I would recommend doing it there. We didn't have time to really cover this today, but if you have questions, you have my email. I'll be happy to help with that, as well as the Ciphers team as well. Okay, so let me show you an example how Ciphers works. But let's do a quick check here. So who's Jupyter Binder is still spinning right now? Oh, nobody. So everybody got it up and running. Yeah, try go in there and pick any of the notebooks in there and just make sure you can actually run it. Because the idea is that should run for every one of you. There shouldn't be any exceptions. Let me know if there's a problem. Let's spend a minute, run any of the notebooks in this tutorial. Just want to make sure it actually runs. Working for everyone? Okay. So let me show you Ciphers now. So this is one of my own projects. It's a little tutorial here that basically maps mutations onto 3D structures. And that repository looks like this. Here it's called MMTF Genomics. And as you scroll down, I put that Binder button there. And you can try it, but unfortunately, in many cases, it won't work because it's just too compute and memory intensive. It fails occasionally. So that's really not a good way of doing it, But now instead, we have a Ciphers launch button here. And there are step-by-step instructions here if you want to use Ciphers, But anyway, so what you would do, you click on this link. But as I said, it requires a login, because you have a user account, so you need to log in. So I already logged in before, so it comes up right away. And then I would just say up here, launch analytics. But to make it faster, I already launched it. Rather than waiting for it to launch, I already did it. Let me see. Yeah, this one here. That's bigger. You probably can't see that, but the URL up there now says ciphers.org. So this actually runs on Ciphers here. And this maps mutations to a protein structure. So for example, somebody asked about, what about protein-protein interactions? So this particular notebook looks at mutations mapped to protein-protein interactions. So here's an example. It's a little bit difficult to see here. So there's a mutation here on, I don't know, you probably can't see that. It says chromosome 11 and a particular genomic location. And in this dark red here, that's actually the residue that's being mutated. And that residue is at the border of a protein-protein interaction. And the interacting residues that interact with this mutated amino acid, they are highlighted here. This is an example of using the Pi 3D mold together with other software to create this type of visualization. And this is not custom made. I didn't say, okay, mutate this particular residue. It's a generic workflow that you can run through. and that's shown here. So this, again, an example maybe how a good way of organizing a notebook. The first one reads the mutations. That's the first notebook that prepares the data in a way it's needed. Then the next step maps that onto 3D protein structures. Then that notebook I'm currently showing you maps it onto polymer or protein-protein interactions. The next one maps it onto ligand interactions, and finally it maps it onto drug interaction with known drugs. So maybe let's look at this notebook 5. It's basically mapping a mutation onto a binding site, protein binding site, and whoops. So in here, now in green, there's a mutation on chromosome 9, and right next to it, you see there's a FDA-approved drug bound to it. And again, this is an entire workflow. I'm using, again, those Pi widgets. Again, I can just go through. So this has like 24 or 25 examples in here. I can just slide through any of them. And so let's maybe look at this one here. So there's a FDA-approved drug called bosutinib. And let's see where it binds. So there's the binding site right here. That's the drug molecule in green, and the mutation, see, it's right next to that drug, so it probably causes some resistance mutation. So that's just an example of, the kind of things you can do. Okay, see this, you can't really run on binder. I mean, it kind of works, but it's not very, If you need more resource, I suggest going to ciphers.org. All right. Okay, any questions generally about binder? Okay. Okay, then now we're going to the hands-on part where we want you to create your own Git repository and basically go through the whole step. So we're now going to part 6, which is projects. So let's everybody go into the 6 projects folder. So in this project, there are two examples in here. One is called 3D visualization, and one is called scope classification. That's a machine learning example. So you can choose any of those two for the tutorial. Now, if you have your own notebook, you can use that as well. It really depends on you. So the Readme file down here has now step-by-step instructions. So the idea is now you have time to go through the whole process, where you apply all the 5 tools that you learned about. And let's have a quick look here. What you need to do is, so you learned before, how to set up a project in GitHub. We need to do that. Then we need to create an environment in Conda. Then you create your Jupyter notebook or use the examples that I provided, and then set it up in Binder. So that's what we're trying to do now for the rest of the hour or so. So here are now step-to-step instructions. First of all, you want to deactivate, I think, your current environment, your ISMB 2019. So just do a conda deactivate. And we want to create our own project, but don't create that project inside that ISMB folder. Go somewhere else on your disk and create a new folder, create a new directory. You choose the name, of that project. Okay, is everybody there? Okay. So next, then you cd into that directory that you just created. And so once you're in there, first we want to be able to put the data. As I said, the data, you don't want to mix them with code. So we're going to create in this project directory, we're going to create another directory called data. So we do an mkdir data. So the data we want to use are from the ISMB tutorial. In the ISMB tutorial, there's a data folder. Let's try to get that data file and copy that into this directory here. So you need to find out where you have your file, and we want to put that into this data directory. So you see this tweet at Jupyter that has a file in it called data.csv. That's the one we want to copy into your own project now. If you have trouble finding the data file, don't worry about it. We don't necessarily need it, so we can skip it if you didn't get it. So now we want to create a directory where all the notebooks go. So we're going to mkdir notebooks. So we want to create a notebook directory where we're going to put the notebooks. So and then we'll just, to make it easy, we just copy over all the notebooks from the tutorial. So find again where your tutorial was and copy that notebook folder here. I think actually there's something missing. I think we should have done a copy -r here because we're copying entire folder. So say up here copy -r, the path to your notebooks folder from the tutorial, and copy that into your own notebooks folder. If you have trouble with that, raise your hand or put your red flag up. Fergus and Fergus will help you with that. Yeah, so in the ISMB tutorial, there's a folder called Notebooks. You copy this whole folder with everything in it over. Well, actually, I'm sorry. It's actually, there isn't any. Let's see. So, let's see. Actually, yeah, I'm sorry. That's wrong in our instruction. What we want to copy over is the 6 projects folder, actually. We want to copy basically those notebooks here, our sample notebooks, into this notebooks folder. Does that make sense? Sorry about that. Yeah, copy and then -r 6 projects or wherever it is to your notebooks folder. So maybe if you are done, can you put up your green flag? I just want to see where we are here. Yeah, we're copying the 6 projects folder into this notebooks directory. But if you have your own notebooks, you can put them in there as well. So when you go into that notebooks folder, you should see the two examples. One is called 3D visualization, and one is called something with scope classification. They should be in there. Yes. Yeah, you can just copy the whole folders. Yes, put up your green flags when you're finished, or the red one if you have any issues, or you have an issue. Fergus, here's a person with a red flag in the front. So if you're already done with copying notebooks over, the next thing is we want to copy the binder folder from the tutorial directory. Again, we do a copy -R and copy this binder folder over into your own project. And when you're finished with copying the binder directory, there are two more files we want to copy. One is the license file, and one is this file called .gitignore. I'm sorry? The one that's just called binder, but yeah. Not the one called 6 binder, we want just the one called binder that has, the environment.yml file in it. In this binder, yeah. So if you're already finished, you may also want to create a Readme file. You can launch Jupyter Notebook and create a Readme file if you want. So if you want to test your notebooks, you need to first create the environment. You probably remember from our tutorial, you use this conda env create to create an environment. So next thing you need to do, you need to create a new environment. We already have the ISMB environment, but we now need to create a new one. Let's see. The only thing is it has the same name. That's I currently realize. Let's see. So there's one more step we need to do. If you go to your binder directory, there's an environment.yml file, and we want to change that. So we can do that with Jupyter Lab. So if we run Jupyter Lab in your repository, we can open up this file. And instead of calling it ISMB 2019, I just realized that caused a conflict. Give it the name of your project up there. You know, that should be changed to your project name. Okay, so for those guys who have the green flag up, once you have changed the name of your environment, you can then create the environment and maybe run one of the notebooks just to make sure they actually work. If you forget how to create a conda environment, go back to the prerequisites instructions, and we'll tell you in there how to do it. So let's go there. So to create your own conda environment now, you would do the same thing. You say conda env create -f, and then your project name /, -f, and then binder /environment.yml. So you need to create your own environment now. And once you create the environment, then you say conda activate whatever your project name is, and then you should be able to run a Jupyter Notebook. And after you activate your environment, you also need to do this step again, Jupyter, add the Jupyter Lab extension. If you want to run this locally, you need to install this again as well into your new environment. Okay, so for the guys who are already ready, we can go ahead now. We need to actually create a Git repository for it. So in your My Projects folder, make sure you're in your new My Projects folder, you do a Git init, and then you add this Git Remote. And this needs to be the name of your project here. Yeah, so I noticed in those instructions there's one step missing. You need to create a GitHub. So you need to go to GitHub and create a new repository with this name first. That step is unfortunately missing here. So if you go back to the previous instructions from Fergus, you probably remember how to create you go to github.com, your username, and then you create a new repository and make sure that name that you're choosing there is exactly the same that you used, up here when you created your project here. So that same name should be used in GitHub as well, exactly the same. So maybe if you have your green flag up, can you take down your green flag, and if you're well successful to launch your own project in Binder, then you put the green one back on so we see who got all the way through the end then. Okay, so I hope most of you got it working. If not, I will be around for the next 2 days. I'm happy if you see me, just pick any of the three of us. If you see we help you, try to get it working. It's a little bit difficult to get it working with 50 people at the same time. Everybody has different issues. So I just want to kind of wrap this up a little bit to see what we learned. So, we talked about the 4 pillars of reproducible research, and you already do the open access publications, but we showed, about open data, how to get your code open in GitHub, hosting in GitHub, and then using Binder, or if you want Ciphers in the future, to basically host your notebooks so anybody can use them. And so hopefully you can apply those techniques to your own project. So for your next publication, maybe try to set up all your figures and data and calculations up in a notebook. And when you publish it, you can add that link to your notebooks in your publication so people can actually reproduce your research. And this is the tools we learned about. So you learned about Jupyter and Jupyter Lab. You learned about how to set up your environment in Conda, how to use version control in GitHub, and finally hosting it in Binder. So you learned a lot of stuff. So I know it's a little short to do this all in this short time frame, but hopefully this gives you at least an idea what you can do, and you may need to spend a little more time to read up on more. There's a lot of materials online to learn more about this. And then we showed you this workflow here, how all the different tools fit together. So we used Conda to define our environment. We used Git and GitHub to put our project under version control. And finally, we used Binder to share it with everyone. And really, I want to thank the Jupyter and Binder team who have done a terrific job here. This is the team. These are the people involved in the Jupyter and Binder team here. We really need to thank them. A lot of them are volunteers, working on this. This is Tim Head. He was supposed to be here today. He's part of the Binder team, but he couldn't make it, unfortunately. Those are my acknowledgments. Yeah, so also the basic idea of open source is, many of us are volunteers doing that, and one way you can do that is first by citing software. That's one thing, but in GitHub you can add a star. So hopefully, if you look at our repository, the tutorial repository, hopefully we have there like 50 or whatever stars, if you like it, obviously. But this is one way you can appreciate that, because funding agencies, they care about those GitHub stars, believe it or not, but those are important. So this is one way you can appreciate people, by starring their directory. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll show you what that means. But really, hopefully from now on, try to make your research reproducible, and not just dump some code somewhere and other people have to figure out how to run it. And most importantly, you need to fill out a survey. You can either use that link in here or on the repository. There's also a link to. So in here on the bottom, there's that survey and feedback link. So please fill this out. That's very important for us too. So with that, are there more questions? We still have 10 minutes or 12 minutes, so we're happy with questions. And apologies for the last workflow. I missed a few steps. That's the problem if you just write it and don't try it yourself. But I think you have all the materials now, so if you try this on your own, hopefully you can go back to those slides and examples and go, do this step by step. So in case you don't know how to start a Jupyter or a Git repository, so this is, for example, the tutorial here. Right now we only see 5 stars, which is disappointing. So you just click on this and see, oh no, it's just up there. Okay, we got 17 stars. So that's what I mean with starting a repository. So we will be around, if you have questions, put up your red flag or wave at us, we'll help you. And then lastly, I want to really thank the Fergus to help with this. It was much more work than expected to set all this up. So.